Good morning. Do I have sound? Do I have sound? It seems so. Come on now, focus. Thanks for tuning in. This is the lead up 5 minutes. Wait for more people to jump on. Gonna talk about how to figure out chords by ear today. Good morning, Jack. Thanks for tuning in. I'm in Hawaii, home of the ukulele. Big Island. Yeah, northeast side, a little plantation town called Honoka'a. Guess I should have some sort of musical example we can work through. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for me to try and illustrate my points here. I'm realizing how long it's been since I opened up my lessons folder with all my sheets. Oh my gosh, it's so sad. I'm actually from Cali. That is my place of birth and of growing up until I was 12. It's a cool spot. It's not as cool as Hawaii, but it's pretty good. Morning, Steve. Thanks for tuning in. Trying to pick a song here that we can work through and I can teach. So many options. That ought to work. Cool, cool, cool. Good morning, Harold. Thanks for checking in. I'm going to try and answer at least part of your question today. Hopefully, it'll be helpful for what you're working on. Wait just a little bit longer and then we can get started. And yeah, if you haven't checked it out, I've been working for the past month with Dominator, who has made a huge collection of ukulele tabs over the years, and he kind of got shifted around, shuffled around for his site hosting, so his site wasn't online anymore as of last year. And so I've been working with him to get some of his tablatures back online, and like the full resources. He always made like a power tab download and a MIDI download so you could hear what it was supposed to sound like, and it was fabulous material, but it wasn't available. So I've been working with him, and we actually kind of just finished up yesterday putting together an index page on my site to bring that content back to the general ukulele public. So there's a link in the chat if you want to check that out. There's over 100 songs and tablatures that he's put together, mainly like ukulele instrumental kinds of stuff. So a fairly unique look at transcriptions of some of those songs. You often see like solo arrangements of jazz stuff and popular songs, but uh, specifically for ukulele pieces, that was kind of Dominator's thing. And there's some really killer material in there if you need something new to check out and learn. Okay, so I want to talk today about learning to figure out chord changes by ear and how to kind of deduce what your possible options are from what you know of a song. And so when you're looking at figuring out the chords, it's helpful to know what key you're in, because knowing what key you're in can help you limit down your options. If there's no key that you know you're working in, you have like you could be looking at any number of chord combinations. If you have like the three main chord types, major, minor, and seventh, or even just major, minor, that's like 24 chords that could be possibilities. It's going to take a long time to try and figure out one by one what those chords are. So a better approach is usually to figure out what key the song is in, and then that naturally narrows it down to seven main chord possibilities, or really like six main chord possibilities that you can have in a given key, because those are the chords that naturally occur in a key. Usually, the best way to figure out what key you're in, at least this is how I kind of started, and it sounds like it's how Harold is working through it, because he was kind of the one who inspired the subject of today's lesson, he asked a question over on the Discord, and it's just diddling around and finding the notes in the melody and what notes work in the sound of the song and which notes don't. Okay, so this goes for any song. It's best if you get started practicing this and learning this with a more simple tune. If you jump in and start trying to figure out like Misty or some other weird jazz song, you're gonna have a lot harder time than if you start with something that's like a basic 3 chord song, like start with When the Saints Go Marching In or something along those lines that's very straightforward. So what you can do is if you have a listening reference like a recording or an MP3 or a CD or a vinyl, whatever you use, you put it going, you get the sound in your head, and you kind of just start diddling along with it, right? And depending on what key you're in, the melody is going to sit in a different place. If you don't have some sort of recording reference, you're going to be playing it out of your head, which means your mind, unless you have perfect pitch, might pull a random key that's not necessarily the key of the recording, which can kind of cause confusion if you ever go back to play the song with the recording. So that's something to understand, is that the where the relative pitch of the melody and the chords are depends on the key. And if you're figuring out a song out of your head in a key that's not the same as the recording, what you play when you play along with the recording is not going to match. So, especially when you're starting, it's really nice to play along with the recording so that your brain kind of doesn't have to fill in the blanks. You could just listen and respond. That's super helpful. So let's see if I can reverse engineer something for you, and we'll start out. I'm just gonna play the song. Okay, I'm thinking "Octopus's Garden" by the Beatles would be a good simple song to start with. It's straightforward. It's got a repeating chord pattern, and it's simple. That's the main thing. So I'd like to be under the sea in an octopus's garden in the shade. He'd let us in, know where we've been. In an octopus's garden in the shade, or however the words go, right? That's the sound. That's getting the sound in your ear so that you know that those harmonies working together create the key. So from that, assuming that I just played is what's happening on your stereo or whatever, I'm not positive that's the key the recording's in, but that's what we're going to work with today. The next bit would be to figure out the melody. And I made a video about this. It's on my YouTube channel. If you feel like you want more information about figuring out melodies by themselves. But basically, you're just moving up and down to find a note that works. And then you're trying to figure out is the melody going up or is it going down or is it staying the same? And if you can answer that, you can search in the right direction and find the next note. And you just kind of build one note at a time. And it's a painfully slow process at first. But here's kind of the melody. Right? And I'm kind of figuring it out on the go because that's how it works. Something along those lines. Now, what you can do, and this takes a lot of time. This takes lots of practice. This is what it took me a long time to figure it out. It's just one of those things you just work at and you slowly get a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable, and things start to make more sense. Because if I just was listening to the recording and I was picking out the melody and I figured out kind of what the melody is, copying the recording, I'm going to be in the key of the recording. Hopefully, that's the idea, is if you're playing the right melody notes, you're going to be in the right key. And when that happens, you can take the notes that you're playing that sound right, and you can apply those to what you know of scales. Or you could print out a scale chart that shows the different notes that happen in different scales, because each key This is kind of theory background more than I would like, but just to give you a little bit of mental help so that you can follow along. A key is made up of notes that are the same distance from each other, right? A major scale is always going to be a major scale. The distance from between those notes is always going to be the same. But when you change key, you're raising and lowering the pitch of all those notes the same amount. And when you raise those notes that same amount, the names of the pitches change, and that's what gives you the different keys. So, for instance, the key of C is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. It has no sharps or flats, which is the little small lowercase b and the number sign. It doesn't have a sharp or a flat. But if I go to the key of F, because of the way the pitches move to keep them the same relative to each other, in the key of F, there's F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, and F. So there's one flat in the key of F. And each key, all 12 keys, have a unique signature that is a certain number of flats or sharps. And some keys are just flats and some keys are just sharps. There's no keys that have a flat and a sharp. There's always a way to explain a key and to tell the pitch being all flats or all sharps. And that's kind of beside this lesson, but that's the idea, is that certain keys have certain notes in them that the next key doesn't. There's always going to be one note different, at least one note different between all the different keys. So by knowing what those different notes are, by looking at a chart or having some scales in your head, however, wherever you're at in your studies, you can figure out what key the melody you're playing is in if you can identify the names of the notes on the fretboard. So what I was doing there with the Octopus's Garden, G, that's an A. So like if you wanted to follow along, you could write these down and then create like a list of all the possible notes you're playing or all the notes you are playing, and then see which key those notes fit in. There's an E, and then an F, D, A. So I have basically all the notes of a C scale except for the B, which is interesting. I didn't plan it this way, but that means that because of the way the notes are laid out, and because I'm not playing the B note is going to determine the difference between the key of C and the key of F. Because in the key of all the notes in the key of C are the same in the key of F except for the B flat, right? So if I was to continue working through the song and figuring out more of the song, whatever it may be, if I was to hit a B, I would know that the key of the song is C, because that B dials it in, it locks it in to being in that key. Assuming you're not playing over chords that are out of the key. That's sort of beside the point, and why you should start with simple songs that are, within the key. But if I was working on the melody and I played a B flat, that would put me in the key of F. It's just a process of elimination of which notes fit over which keys. And yes, Harold points out that the scale chart on page 39, let's see if it's actually page 39 or if it's page 39 in the file. This is my book, Ukulele Chord Shapes. Yes, 39. Look at that. So it's got this scale chart where it shows all of the scales, all the 12 scales, and the notes that are in them. Okay, and that is very common knowledge. That is not special to my book. I'm gonna see if I can. Where would that be? Let's see. I know it's on the website. I just got to look it up. If you can bear with me 1 second, I can throw that up on the site or on the chat so you have access to that. Why is that not there? That seems like an oversight. Da, 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 da. Oi. Oi, oi. Um, so what I'm gonna do, note relationships, maybe diatonic chord scales. It's in my theory stuff somewhere. I'm sorry I'm wasting your time on this, but trying to give you the resource. I'll post a link up in the description of the video. That would be probably the most time sensitive way of going about this. But in the meantime, we'll go super low tech and I'll show the chart on the camera if I can get it kind of focused. Except I hope it's not backwards for you folks. It's backwards for me. But as you can see, I've got it set up so that you start at A and then work your way through all the different keys. And each key, if you notice, it shifts obviously, but each key is going to have a different set of sharps and flats. For instance, the key of A has 3 sharps. The key of E has 4 sharps. And the difference between that one sharp is going to affect which key you're in as you're figuring out what you're playing. Like what I was talking about with that B note that was not included in the melody, and if it was B flat, it would be F, or if it was B, it would be the key of C. That is what you're going to learn as you practice figuring these things out, is which key has which notes in it. And at first, when you start doing this, you might have to play around, and if the melody doesn't include the note that you need to determine which key you're in, you can just use your ear. Your ear is going to tell you whether or not the B or the B flat is going to be appropriate for the song that you're playing. Right? If I'm playing Octopus's Garden, da 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 da, wrong chord, da 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 da. So if I was to like solo over the top of that, if you keep that harmony in your ear, the B is what works there. If I was to play the B flat, I'll get the chords in your head again. The B flat's not going to work as well. If the flat 7 is like it's a specific bluesy kind of sound, and it's not part of the key. That note is outside of the key of C. But the B, the natural B on the second fret, that is included in the key. So that one sounds very, very normal and home. It's consonant in the key. So we know that we're in the key of C instead of the key of F. Now, there are lots of examples I could give you of this probably. Each song's going to be in a different key for the most part. Certainly, some keys are used more often than others, and you'll get used to finding the difference in them. But that's what you want to figure out, is which notes make up which key and how to kind of fill in the gaps to find what key you're in just from the melody notes, or just from improvising a little bit and figuring out, okay, I'm playing this note, that's a XYZ name note that fits in the key of this, but I'm also playing XYZ name note, and that also fits in this key, but it doesn't fit in this other key. So you can, by process of elimination, reduce the number of keys that you're in. And the more you do it, the faster you're going to get. You're going to know, just by playing some notes, you're going to get to a point where you know what notes are in a certain key, and the most efficient way to kind of eliminate options of the keys that you might otherwise have to search through by playing the entire scale. Instead of playing the entire scale, you can play just a couple notes, and just those couple of notes are going to tell you what you need to know, and like, boom, that's the key. You're just gonna know already. And I don't have an example in mind. I'm not sure exactly. I've never tried to explain this bit of it before, so I don't exactly know what the most effective example I could give you is. but this is just a practice thing. Even if I give you an example, you're still going to have to kind of spend the time working on it yourself. Okay, so 20 minutes of single notes and keys and all this good stuff. All you're doing is eliminating possibilities. And I will put, like I said, I will put um, this scale chart on the description of the video, and you'll have that as a reference. If not, if you like Google scales, notes in scales or something like that, you'd probably get a Google image that would pop up. Um, it's not a secret whatsoever. It's just that I happen to present it in this book. And so yeah, Joan, that's where I was going next, is the chords that naturally occur in whatever key you end up with, right? We're playing along, we're figuring out the melody, the Octopus's Garden, and we know that we're in the key of C. So what does that mean? You could assume that the C chord is going to be a good option, but what else fits in the key, and how do you know that? And so basically a key is made up of, you've heard of the 1-4-5, right? The 1-4-5. It just means that in the key of C, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. Those are the notes that make up the key of C. If you give them numbers, C equals 1, D equals 2, E equals 3, that kind of a thing, the 1-4-5 ends up being C, F, and G. Those are all going to be major harmonies. So C major, F major, G major. Those are usually your most common chords in a key. So if you're playing a song and I want to figure out Octopus's Garden, I'm going to lean on those most. I'm not going to necessarily limit myself to those, but if possible, when you're beginning to learn, if you can find a 3-chord song that only uses the 1-4-5, it's way easier to figure out at first, because those are the only chords that are being used, and you can train your ear to hear kind of the difference between the chords, because each of these in relation to each other, they're going to have different tonalities and pushes and pulls in their sound. Like C, if C is the home chord, that's like the most relaxed. But when you go to F, it's a little bit of a lift. You're kind of like, there's a little bit of expectation. But then you go to the G, and the G is the 5 that has the most tension of any chord that you could play in a key. And that's what I call the rubber band chord. And we talked about this in one of the other live streams where I had the rubber band, and it was something to do with ear training, I believe. We must have been talking about chords. But the rubber band of the G that's the tightest pull. And then you go back to C, and it's like, that's home, that's consonant. 1, 4, 5. It's really good to get familiar with those. And as you start playing in more keys, you're going to, and figuring out the chords in those keys, you're going to start seeing the 1, 4, 5 patterns coming up a lot. And eventually, if you can, you're going to be able to memorize what the 1, 4, 5 is in every key, because it's always going to be the same. You know, in the key of F, the 1, 4, 5 is F, B flat, and C. In the key of G, it's G, C, and D. And these things don't change. So when you end up playing in the key of G and you're like, oh, my melody fits in the key of G, so I'm in the key of G, you can look right off the bat for G, C, and D. Those are your chords that you're going to start looking at. But now, what are the rest of the chords? Because in every key, there are 7 notes. And each of those notes represents a chord or a partial bit of harmony. Basically, what happens and how we know what these chords are that fit in the key. This is a lot of goose chases in this lesson, but it all kind of relates and is important. If you play a C, I'm going to use the top 3 strings of the ukulele as an example. I'm not going to play the bottom string. That right there is all 3 notes you need to play a C chord harmony. There's a C note, an E note, and a G note. That's not super important. But what is important is from this C chord, if we move up on each string to the next note in the scale from whatever note you're starting on, if we're on the E string, the next note in the key of C is going to be F. If you're on the C string, the next note in the scale is going to be D. And on the G string, the next note in the scale is going to be A. And if you put those all together, you end up with the next chordal harmony that fits within the key. So we have C, and then this is D minor. And if you go up from there, move these notes up to the next note in the scale on each string, you end up with, I'm just going to run through this, you end up with E minor. From there, if you move up every note on every string that we're playing, you would get F. And then G, that's our 1 4 5 C F G, right? And then if you were to keep going, you'd get A minor, and then B diminished, and then back to C. Okay, so you have 3 major chords, the 1 4 5. You have 3 minor chords, the D minor, E minor, and the A minor. And then you have a funny diminished chord, which you can umbrella under the 5, because this diminished chord adds in one note to the 5 that makes the 5 a 7. So a lot of times the 5 chord, the 1 4 5, is actually a 7th chord. That's why when you play simple songs, you hear C, F, and G7 a whole lot. And that 7th on the 5 chord is part of this B diminished here, which is the 7th chord. So the 7th chord can be thought of as the 5 7 again. So nobody really talks about the 7 chord. It's always just the first 6. And 3 of them are major and 3 of them are minor. Any questions? This is a lot of technical information, but it kind of all relates, and I'm not sure how else I could explain it that would be more simple. So the 1 4 5 is an easy way to remember what the major chords are in a key: C, F, G. The minor chords are actually just the relative minor of any of these chords. If you go back, I did a video where we talked about a live stream where we talked about relative minors. If you count up from any note in its respective scale, if you count up 6, you get the relative minor. C, D, E, F, G, A is the relative minor in the key of C. So if I play A minor, that's the relative minor of C, and C is the relative major of A minor. So A minor, that's one of our minor counterparts in the key of C. Same for F. If I play F and then find the relative minor of F, F, G, A, B, C, D would be 6. So now my relative minor for F is D minor. That's another one of the chords in the key of C. And if you do it for G, you end up with E minor. So A minor, D minor, and E minor are just the relative minors of the 1 4 5. That's the harmony picture for a given key. You can think about it as well. The relative minor key, the 1 4 5 of the relative minor key, if A is your 1, D is your 4, and E minor is your 5. Just saying. That's another way to think of it. So C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and then the diminished thing, or G7, and then C. Those are the chords that you would use in a given key. And of course, the names of the chords are going to change, but the tonality of them is not. So if I was to go think of the pattern that we just came up with there. The first chord, the C, is major, and then D minor is minor, and then E minor is minor. So major, minor, minor, and then we have the 4 and the 5, major, major. Then we have another minor, and then we have diminished or 5, 7, and then back to the 1. So the tonality pattern for the harmony of a given key is going to always be major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, or 5, 7, major, back to the beginning. And that applies to any key. So if I was to say jump into the key of A, right? The key of A is A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. Those are the notes in the key. If I was to work my way through that and apply the major, minor, minor thing to it, I can figure out all the chords in the key of A. So for A is the first note. That would be a major, right? A, that is the name of the key, the root of the key, A. After that is a B note, and we know that the next chord in the sequence is going to be a minor. B minor. That's the next note in the key of A. After that we have C sharp minor. Or like this, right? And then we have D major, that's the 4, and then E major, that's the 5, and then we have F sharp minor, F sharp minor, and then G sharp is the diminished thing, but it's also like the 5, 7, and then we go back to the beginning. So you can figure out what chords fit with any key by using that pattern. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. So yes, Joan, she asks, would you use the minor chords of the key of C as possible chords for a given song? Yes, absolutely, because those are, assuming you're figuring out a straightforward song that's not borrowing chords from other keys, because as soon as you borrow chords from other keys, things go off the rails really fast. So we just, as if you're new to this, you just need to, I need to assume that you are figuring out a song that is simple enough that it stays within the harmony of the key. It doesn't go outside, because then it gets into a whole nother ball of wax and you have to really just use your ears. And it's best to train your ears where you know what the parameters are. And in this case, the parameters are those main 6 chords, the 3 major chords and the 3 minor chords. All right. So if I've already played Octopus's Garden for you, the chords for it. But if I know, I'm going to start probably by leaning on the 1, 4, 5 chords and start with them and see how much of the song I can fill in with them. And if there's any part of the song that doesn't work, then the next place I'm going to look is one of the minors. Okay? The frequency of occurrence can be kind of helpful, but it's also just extra thinking if you don't always want to just add extra thinking. But what you can think of is the C is the most common chord that you're going to run across, or the 1 chord, I should say. But if we're talking in the key of C, so it'd be C. The 1 chord is always going to be the most common chord on average across most songs. Some songs don't even use the 1 chord, but they're in the key of C. That's sort of beside the point. But the 1 chord is going to be, on average, the most popular chord. After that, it's probably going to be the 5 chord, the G. After that, it's probably going to be the 4 chord. Following that is going to be the A minor, and after that is probably the E minor, followed by the D minor. Okay, and that's just rough estimations, but it also gives you a place to start, and you'll see that because Octopus's Garden uses those first 4. It doesn't use the D minor and the E minor. We're just on the C. And when you're playing through a song and listening, minor chords have that signature kind of sound to them, right? They're a little bit more sad. They're just kind of, it's a downturn, and that chord inherently as part of it has that sound. So if I'm playing through Octopus's Garden, moves to that sadder tonality. So a lot of times you can hear minor chords and you won't need to like search for them so much. It's like, oh, that's a minor chord. Oh, that doesn't sound sad. That's a major chord. And by finding the contrast between them can be helpful because that eliminates half of the key. If you can figure out, oh, that sounds minor, oh, that sounds major, right? And then you're only looking at three chords and three chords instead of all six and trying to figure out just from scratch. Like, no, it's not a G. Da-da-da, da-na-na-na. That's not as bad, but da-na-na-na, da-na-na-na. That doesn't fit. If you listen, most melodies fit the chords that they're over. There's a reason the chords are chosen to be under certain parts of the melodies because it sounds most consonant with the melody. Da-na-na-na, da-na-na-na. That would be like the second best option, maybe. And at first you might choose the second best option and it might be wrong, but that's just the process of learning is you're going to play some wrong chords and think that something that's wrong is actually right. And as you do it more and more, you're going to get better and you might go back and like, that's not right. And you'll find a better solution. So, it's like usually if you trust your gut, you go with the super obvious one. It's like, oh yeah, duh, that's the chord I should be playing over. That's what you want to aim for is having that aha moment. It's like, yes, that's the chord. And sometimes, like I said, you're going to lie to yourself. Your ears are going to play tricks on you, and you're going to think it's right when it's actually wrong. That's just part of the game. Something to think about when you're playing songs, especially simple songs, is a lot of times the progressions repeat or portions of the progressions repeat. And what a progression is it's just an order of chords that goes around in a circle or recurs later in the song. For instance, Octopus's Garden is for the most part, except for like the pre-chorus or the bridge or whatever it is, it's gonna be dun 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 dun. And then it starts over. It does the same thing. Da, 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 da. So that's a progression. It's the C, A minor, F, G thing. That would be considered a chord progression. And a lot of times, folks use progressions as it's a good starting point. Progressions are a great starting point. And when you can see the patterns and realize that it's a pattern, it's a useful learning device. Like if I was teaching you how to play Octopus's Garden, I would just say and play C, A minor, F, and G over and over and over until I tell you to do something else. And if you're playing the chords with the right amount of, beats per chord, you're going to stay right with me because that's the progression and it goes around in a circle. However, though, people do get a little hung up on progressions sometimes and they think that like learning progressions by themselves can be useful. And as far as like figuring out songs and implementing songs, I'm on the fence about that one. I wouldn't recommend a student usually going out like just to learn progressions for the sake of learning progressions because it doesn't have a lot of relevance to what you're trying to do. And even if you're figuring out a song again and again that uses the same progression, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Like Harold is pointing out in the chat that is like the doo-wop progression that Ringo had in that song. Or like what's another one? Earth Angel. Right? That's like a million songs. And that's good. But if you get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm going to learn 50 songs with the same doo-wop chord progression, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. You're going to get good at playing that chord progression. But if you're going for figuring out songs by ear, it is more useful, honestly, to figure them out fresh each time and to act kind of like a beginner. It's like, oh, I don't know what the chords are in this song. And then when you get to the end of the progression, it's like, oh wow, that's like the doo-wop progression. Now it's familiar. But by forcing your ear to like go through those hoops and figure out what the chords are by ear, then you're learning each time, as opposed to like, oh well, Earth Angels that, and Octopus's Garden is that, and all these other songs are that as well, and then just playing them. If you want to train your ear, you just have to suck it up and sit and listen and figure out what it is, which is another reason there's no such thing as like learning a song from a piece of paper and also be learning it by ear. It's usually one or the other. And what I would recommend is do as absolute much as you can just by ear without ever looking at a sheet for the song. Figure it out, even if it's wrong. And then when you're just completely tapped and you want to throw your ukulele out the window and frustrated and is like, I can't get it, then that is the moment where you like look up the sheet, see what the chords are, or see what somebody else thinks the chords are. It doesn't necessarily mean they're right, but it might help you, and it might go, oh yes, that's the right one. And when you see somebody else put it down on paper, then you play it as like, oh yeah, that's the one. Or maybe you're looking inside the key and it just happens that you're playing a harder song than you think, and there are actually notes from outside the key, and if you're not used to hearing those, then you're going to um, have a harder time because you're going to be looking for something that's not even there. You're actually looking for a chord that is outside the key, but you don't know it. So you're just, C, F, G. Nope. A minor, D minor, E minor. It's not any of those. What could it possibly be? I must be hearing something wrong. Not necessarily if it's a more complicated song. So, a couple questions, or a question. I can only do one chat item at a time. Joan asks, why is the fifth note G in the key of C? Why is it a seventh chord rather than a G major chord in many songs? Often it's because it's easier on ukulele to play G7 than G, usually for most people. But the seventh chord also has more sonic tug. As a harmony piece, it's a little bit more able to slingshot you back to the C. If I play that G7, I'm waiting for the C, right? My ear is waiting for the C because that's what is supposed to come next to F. Just as a music listener and a music appreciator, you're going to inherently know that, like, come on, there's something after that. Come on, come on, come on, play the next chord. It's just mean to end a song there. It's too much tension. And that G7 creates a lot more tension than just the normal G because of that seventh note. It's that extra bit of pull, an extra bit of spite in the sound that just kind of makes it more interesting and slingshotty if you're going back to the C, right? If I go to just G, it's a little less offensive to stop there. It's a little less rubber bandy. It doesn't need to resolve quite as much. But I think for the most part with ukulele stuff, the reason you see G7 is because it's actually easier to play. There are a lot of songs where I would rather play just the major chord because that preserves the integrity of the harmony, I feel, better than a seventh chord. A lot of times on the ukulele, for some reason, seventh chords are easier to play than the major counterparts. Like if you're in the key of A or whatever, why would you struggle to play an E when you could just play an E7, right? So it's sort of a choice thing and an ease of use sort of thing. But you should know that the core harmony of the key, if you're doing 3-note harmonies, right? Each of these C, D minor, E minor, F, G, those chords all have 3 notes in them. If you're following 3-note harmonies, it's going to be just a G major, not a G7, because a G7 has that extra note. It's actually a 4-note harmony, in which case you would be playing, like, you can do the same work your way up through the different chords in the key, note by note, string by string. If you were to start from like a C major 7, you could play that would give you an extension on the chord. Now you have a 4-note starting chord, the C major 7, and if you take every note from there and move it up, the next note in the key of C would be C, and I would go on the D minor. So now you have a D minor 7, right? And it just becomes, wow, I got a buzz there. Um, it just becomes a 4-note chord, and that's where your G7 would fit in the picture, because then you got 4 notes going all the way through the key, whereas with just the G major you have 3 notes going through the key. So there's a mention of the circle of fifths in the chat. I have never used the circle of fifths in any meaningful way in my learning or my teaching. I just, as a teacher, I don't get it. I don't get how it's any more useful than just having a list of the scales and just learning them. It's never really clicked for me. I know some people get it. I feel like the circle of fifths, it is useful. It does explain obvious things, but it does so in like an extra layer of thinking kind of way. It's like adding an extra interpretation to something that just is already. And so if you use it, that's, I'm not bagging on you at all. That's completely fine. But for me personally, that's why you don't hear or see me teach circle of fifths, is because I don't get it. I don't see the application, and it's not my jam. Um, but that's something that I know people do ask me, like, "Oh, what about the circle of fifths?" Everybody says the circle of fifths is all that, and it's just like kind of such a traditional method that is just sort of what you do if you're learning music traditionally. Whereas in a practical sense, I don't necessarily feel like it's super incredibly useful. At least for like playing ukulele in just like a jam context. If you're just jamming, there are other ways to learn kind of the same thing, simpler, and it just like, here's what you need to know. That's it. Go. That's sort of, over the years, I'm trying to teach more and more like that, less and less theory, because I want to teach people to play music, and the more theory that you have to know to do something, the more you're thinking about it as opposed to just intuitively doing it and playing music. And so I try and counteract sort of that really super Western style of learning. That's been my lean over the years, is that that's great. That's all good stuff. But by default, everybody I teach already has that. It's like you can go on Google and you can read how to use the circle of fifths or all these theory things, and you can figure it out because it's like a math problem. But it's the actual music that's what I'm trying to teach, is like, or show people how to do, is music, 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 and theory is just a means to an end. If we can just go there directly, we're going to get on the fastest train there. So, like I said, there's no better or worse. It's just that's sort of my explanation of why I don't use that, because some people do ask. It's like, whoa, why don't you use the circle of fifths? And that's sort of why. Okay. Any last questions about any of that? I know there's so much to explore with ear training, but at the end of the day, you have to do the work. That's why I was actually reading Victor Wooten's latest book, which, I didn't. There wasn't a whole lot to it. I didn't really enjoy it, but he talks so much about teachers being just showers, that I can't actually. Me being here, I'm not actually. They call me a teacher, but I'm not actually teaching you anything. I'm just showing you things that you have to teach yourself. And really, this is a fantastic example of that. Is I can show you the stuff, I can tell you how to figure things out by ear, but you have to teach yourself how to do this and get better and better at it. Bob has a great question that's sort of related to what we're talking about with the harmony. Why is the Hawaiian D7 called a D7 when the notes in the chord are different? it's not actually a D7. This is actually a diminished chord. 2020. If you've never heard of this before, normal D7 is played like this. This is the traditional D7 shape, but in Hawaii, people play this. And my interpretation of it is because this is the Hawaiian D7 because that's what we play, because it sounds better than the other one. When you're playing with slack key and Hawaiian style musicians, this D7 fits in the background better because, and in my interpretation, this D7 is like, this is the worst D7 in my opinion because it has the blues note at the very highest position in the chord. So when you play the chord, your ear hears the highest note as the flat 7. So it's the most like, it's kind of like a bee buzzing in your ear, right? You play any of the other ones, it's a little more rounded when you play these guys. The notes are balanced from beginning to end because the flat 7 is lower in the voicing. But this one, it's on the very top. And my interpretation is that the Hawaiians didn't like that note on the top, so they got rid of it. And this was a substitution that sounded fine because this has 3 of the notes in a D7 chord. So this, to continue your question, Bob, this integrates perfectly with a normal D7 chord. You can play either one because the harmony of the song is asking for those 4 notes, but you can simplify it by playing the Hawaiian D7 that only uses 3 of those notes. And this actually doesn't have a D in it. So this also sort of assumes that you're playing with somebody. If you're playing with a guitar or with a bass player, this voicing makes even more sense because they're picking up the D note that's supposed to be in the chord. That's just my interpretation. So yes, you can replace a traditional D7 with a Hawaiian D7 at any time because the Hawaiian D7 uses notes from the D7 chord. It doesn't change any of them. It just gets rid of one of the notes, one of the extra notes. Right? Yes, Steve, listening to the bass is it's a good way of picking up on what the chord changes are, and it does often give you the key. However, and I know a lot of people recommend that, and I think it's great if you can do it, but it's almost like teaching an extra skill, teaching people how to listen to the bass when I'm not really a bass player, and most of the people I teach aren't really bass players. So there's not, I can't say for sure what the bass player is actually doing. I just know that, like, oh yeah, the bass is playing that, so I'm gonna play XYZ chord. There's no way for me to really explain that to somebody, like, if the bass player is doing this, do this, or if the bass player is doing that, do that. It's not quite as even an equation for me to show. But certainly listening to the bass tells you tons of information, and if they're good bass players, they should, like, just lead you right to the right note. And if they're good, if they're playing the root, or the root in the 5, whatever they're doing, if they're playing that and it's solid, your chord is going to sound wrong. If it's wrong, they're going to make it sound extra wrong. So in that sense, the bass player is going to hold you a little bit more in line. So it is a great thing to listen to, but it is tricky to teach how to listen to the bass to pick up on that. But definitely, if you can use that, if you can leverage that for yourself, go for it, because that's a powerful tool. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Unless there's any last minute questions, that's a whole lot of that. Go forth and figure out easy songs. If you go to, I know I can find this link. I'm going to give you this link as a parting gift and then send you on your way. Okay. Here are 75 in the chat, 75 options for easy songs that should be, I believe they're all in the key. They're all within the harmonies within one key, within the key of the song. So that would be a good place to find inspiration for songs that you can learn. And remember, when you're learning, you don't always get to make the choices. if a lesson needs to be learned and it doesn't include the song that you want to be learning, that's sort of a tough beans moment, and just learn the skill with something that fits in the parameters of making that skill the easiest to learn as possible. Um, you can't always start at step 10. So check out some of those songs. Those are mostly going to be appropriate for this exercise of figuring out what songs the key are in, um, and which chords go with them. Like I said, don't try and, if you don't have any experience with this, don't try and start with a jazz song, or don't try and start with an R&B song, because a lot of times, if you're listening to Stevie Wonder or whoever, it's like, forget about it. It's weird, 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 weird. So pick something straightforward and simple. And if you can, get started with some 3 chord 1 4 5 types of songs. That will be helpful. Yeah, I do realize that the songs on that list do say what the chord changes are, so that's kind of whatever. But write them down. Wait a couple of days, you'll forget what the chords were just seeing them on the site, and then you can figure them out from scratch, and off you go. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in. Be here next week. I've got the live stream scheduled, so you can go find the channel, go over there and click the little set reminder thing, and you can get a notification when I do go live next week. Otherwise, come check out the Discord, talk story, and here's the Discord. Boop. Yeah, and I'll post up that link to the scale charts. And if I can't find one on my site, I swear I had one on my site. If I can't find one there, I'll just post a link to an image elsewhere on the web that shows the same information, because that's all you really need is the information. Okay, so go forth and play songs by ear. Yay! See you guys later. Aloha.